Thank you. A lot of great material for us to come back to during the discussion. Just before we move into the broader discussion, Timur, I have a couple of questions for you. You are a principal at Blackstone, which is arguably the world's most prestigious and respected private equity firm. So my two questions for you are, one, how do you think about Kazakhstan and the private equity opportunities here versus the global set of opportunities? Because as a firm, you are looking at opportunities all around the world. And maybe before that, you have a rich experience in doing private equity in developed markets. What do those lessons teach you and teach us about where this market needs to go for private equity to play the role that it can play in an economy and in a financial market?
Sure. Thank you, Aniket. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to participate. I'm a native of Kazakhstan myself, but spent most of my career in the United States, so I'm looking a little bit outside in. So I don't have the wealth of local experience that some of my co-panelists have, but I can hopefully comment from the point of view of somebody who knows and loves the country, but perhaps has a bit more an outsider perspective on the market here. I would say the main observation I have about private equity in the developed markets is that private equity is just like any other asset class is a tool that's designed for a particular purpose, and the purpose is housing investments that have long horizon required to realize value. So it's an orientation to hold for 5-7 years or maybe longer. Some of the more recent private equity funds have holding horizons of 10, 12, 15 years, which usually implies that it's a tool that's used to invest in assets that require fairly deep transformation to create value. It's also a tool that's used to address opportunities that have unusual, non-standard risks. Because unlike public markets where everything is standardized and designed for, originally retail investor, now mostly institutional investors, but nonetheless designed with fairly standard set of parameters in mind, private equity tends to address opportunities that require much more customization. And those are really the features that create an opening for private equity investors in the developed markets. A lot of the other things that I would talk about have already been touched upon. Obviously, developed markets have the benefit of predictable regulatory system, developed financial markets, and just the mindset that's trained over the years that the industry existed. Those would be some of the challenges for Kazakhstan, but some of the things that maybe at earlier stage here also present opportunities. I think somebody commented earlier that this is a small market. This, while presenting some challenges, also presents a big opportunity, and now I'm getting into the second question: how would we think about Kazakhstan vis-a-vis other markets? The opportunity presented by the size and scale here is that this country, my country, has an ambitious and strategically minded government that has a set of priorities that it's willing to put resources behind. At the scale of Kazakhstan, that kind of behavior can produce very visible results relatively quickly, because we're not trying to move a super tanker, we're trying to move an agile ship. And private equity, being the asset class that can adapt to an unusual risk profile and that can think long-term, is the right asset class to align with this set of strategic priorities. So absolutely, like many speakers commented, private equity in Kazakhstan will require a partnership with government. But the exciting thing here is that that kind of partnership can yield results that will be visible on a scale of this country. And that is really the opportunity. This is something that distinguishes Kazakhstan from a lot of other markets. It's a place where alignment with a government that's increasingly transparent, increasingly ambitious. This event and a few other initiatives recently, I think, very clearly indicate the desire to modernize and create conditions for successful investing here. All those things present opportunities to partner with government, partner with state agencies, and invest in strategic industries and create opportunities that are hard to replicate elsewhere.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So let me put a question out for the panel, and we'll see where the conversation goes. Love your take on Kazakhstan through the prism of different sectors. This is, of course, a natural resource rich country, but as we heard from Orhan Basar, there's a lot of other trends and opportunities that are happening at a country level. Is private equity only focused here on commodities and infrastructure? Or how do we think about the different opportunity sets in the services, in consumer goods, and other sectors that are driving the new Kazakhstan? Maybe I'll turn to you, Orhan Basar, to start, and then we can move on.
Thanks. We are precluded in our funds by the mandate of the funds themselves to invest into natural resources, but I'm sure that that's a completely different subset and perhaps a very interesting subset of investment opportunities. We have also just recently started to invest in agriculture. But in general, as I mentioned before, there's three trends that, again, it's something that we believe, maybe others view it differently. They will be driving the opportunity set here. So definitely, you're seeing a lot of the B2C emergence here in retail businesses, etc. The issue is the scale, of course, and the traditional private equity houses with the deals like Pavel was mentioning up to $1 billion probably will not be interested in that. But I know that it's a different subset of opportunities. Roland will speak to that. At the end of the panel, he will show us that, Kazakhstan as a country presents a great, not just a local infrastructure, but a throughput, part of the whole, economic reorientation that's happening in the world, and that's a different subset of opportunities that I will not speak to. But I wouldn't dismiss out of hand Kazakhstan's ability to create a very vibrant and, I think, sustainable middle businesses. And our role as a private equity is to take them from that, or meet them halfway, meet them in this precarious stage where just growing, and they've grown enough to become, a bigger business, maybe a regional leader. Maybe it's a company that's going to start exporting their, consumer goods to the region, and we don't have to limit ourselves just to Kazakhstan. If you look around, with Uzbekistan opening, I believe we can foster regional cooperation that will bring, prosperity to all the countries. I think that's another, sustainability goal. You need to have prosperous and stable neighbors. And I think that the Kazakh businesses can explore that. They can also explore opportunities that China definitely presents to them.
Perfect. Roland.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, when you're looking at any investment opportunity, whether it's in Russia or Kazakhstan or globally, you're basically looking for three things. You're looking for something that offers value, something that offers growth, and something where there's a catalyst for change. And in Kazakhstan, that often comes, I think, in areas that are outside of the oil and gas sector, outside of the natural resource sector. There are opportunities there. But, if you think about where you're going to see value, growth, and change, it's going to come in the consumer market, potentially in infrastructure, given the investment that's going to go into that sector, in finance, logistics. There are many sectors which will go through a lot of change that are undervalued at the moment because of the absence of capital coming into the country, and which can generate substantial growth as they go through that change. So I think those are the opportunities that are there. And just to pick up a comment that was being made earlier on, I think by Timur, when we're thinking about private equity in Kazakhstan, often we talk about the challenges that are faced by private equity, the absence of an exit strategy, the absence of deep capital markets in the country, the amount of bureaucracy that sometimes exists. All of those things are are the case in Kazakhstan. They're also the case in Russia. But those barriers actually are also what creates the opportunity. Because if those barriers were not in place, and it was an easy place to do business, then people like Blackstone would have come in here a long time ago and, basically crowded out the rest of us. And, part of our job, I think, as private capital managers, is to find ways in which we can first work through those barriers, understand what those difficulties and challenges are, and put together investment opportunities knowing those challenges and using the expertise that we've got. And secondly, working alongside the government, when a government is willing to try and change, which I think it really is very much in Kazakhstan right now, to bring the expertise that we have as private capital managers to work alongside the government to meet those challenges, and thereby open the opportunity up to, in the future, the likes of the large multinationals like Blackstone to come into the market. So, to me, the barriers that exist actually offer the opportunity to make better returns in Kazakhstan and places like Kazakhstan.
So just piggybacking off of that, it seems like one of the important aspects here is local knowledge and local experience. And this is a point that was made earlier about Russia and also here in Kazakhstan. How, as private investors, do you actually develop that local knowledge that moves beyond the headlines and moves beyond the sort of facile descriptions of a country to really understand what's going on outside the capital cities and the opportunities that are there? Aydan, maybe I can turn to you for some of your experience in this space.
I wouldn't overestimate the local knowledge because the world is pretty much global. You have social networks, you have press, internet, and looking at our team, for example, we have a multinational team, and in fact, the day-to-day business is run by a European guy who doesn't speak Russian or Kazakh, but who's based in Kazakhstan. There are local people with some international experience. So I would say that it's more important in countries like Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan when it's not about figures, it's not about financial model, it's not about that, it's more about how to deal with the head of the local police or how to talk to some politicians and so on. But obviously it's a kind of expertise you can buy and you can get.
Yeah.
Coming back to the previous question about Kazakhstan and oil and gas, and that's a kind of dilemma I'm thinking about for a while, because if you look at what's going on in the world, all these Tesla stories and all that, in order to invest in Kazakhstan, you should be a big believer into oil and gas. Because despite all the efforts to diversify the economy and create some new industries, it's still a long way to go. And if you are such a believer in oil and gas, maybe it's better to buy oil and gas rather than retail or other businesses, so just go to the core of that. Another question, if you believe in oil and gas, maybe there are other places in the world where you can put your money and to get more profit out of that. If you are not believer in oil and gas, then don't come here, or what is that? And it's a kind of, it's a question I cannot find answer for myself, and I think we live in the world that's changing pretty quickly and somehow unpredictable. And unfortunately, we're not sitting on the board of Microsoft like Sequoia to make our judgment about that. But once again, we have to go and to find out some special opportunities, some special deals, and maybe that is what is the local expertise and the local presence. It brings you, it allows you to be in the right place in the right time. That's the purpose of that.
Can I just jump in here? I want to challenge just for fun, because otherwise we're just going to keep talking. You know, we're talking about private equity as if it's a uniform thing. It's not. So let's just make sure the audience understands. $2 billion investment versus a $10 million investment, very different parameters, very different risk reward, very different strategies. So contextually speaking, yes, oil and gas, gotcha. Yes, processing. But let me give you a little bit of experience of perhaps Brazil, okay? I remember when Brazil, no one paid attention. No investment banker wanted to go there. Brazil looked at its vast agriculture, land opportunity, and decided to become an agro-tech hub. They maximized the processing of agriculture. They went out and started to have efficiencies in technology, not just creating the next Microsoft, but from seedling development to the processing of being able to develop agriculture, to the ways of getting to product efficiency. There's a lot to go, but they became leaders, and they started actually to grow their internal market. That's going out and buying international companies. I go back to my original point. The government, and you look at KCM and all the sponsors here, have to be focusing as well as in innovation. Private equity that brings in innovation. Innovation is not a fit-all term. Innovation can be the next Microsoft, the next Google, the next agrotech. It can also be processes and logistical improvements within a value chain that makes your company or a small company or medium company or large company more efficient. And I think that human capital development towards that, strategic partnerships through private equity to transfer knowledge and human capital development, there's absolutely no reason why private equity cannot be a tool for innovation in this country. You have the education, you have the people, you have the want, you have the support of the government. I mean, let's be very clear. You have the AIFC coming out, taking away a lot of the legal risks, ushering a lot of the investment. So I think that innovation is something that we should consider, not just a traditional, let's get another shopping mall. Let's look at ways that we, Kazakhstan, can create a competitive advantage. Brazil looked at that. Asia looked at that. And they leapfrogged economically. Your competitive advantage is one of the agendas that private equity should fit within the policy of government. And I just wanted to make sure we keep that in mind.
Yeah, let me build on that. I think that is exactly right. The analysis of natural competitive strengths is probably first step in defining the sectors that are attractive. And it's also definitely true that private equity is not a uniform asset class. There are different scales, different structures that are involved. So when looking at Kazakhstan and thinking about which sectors attract what flavor of private equity, sectors that are globally relevant, where Kazakhstan has comparative advantage in trade, are probably the ones that would attract the likes of global multinational firms because they enable scale, and also that is where foreign firms can add some value by transferring technology, transferring best practices that are frankly the same in this sector everywhere in the world. And that's already happening in Kazakhstan via foreign direct investment. So the oil fields are developed by oil majors today with obviously the collaboration of local national producers as well. So where private equity could play a role is helping develop the ecosystem around that. There's a whole world of services that surrounds oil and gas, metals, and so forth. Those are labor-intensive industries that can create jobs, that can create human capital development opportunities and profits for investors. So that's an interesting space for private equity. The other advantage the country has outside of the primary industries is just its geographic location. So being at the crossroads of Eurasia is valuable. So transportation and logistics is another sector where large foreign private equity firms can be relevant. When it comes to consumer and retail sectors that generally focus on local market, that's probably where funds that originate locally and that operate locally will always have an edge, and that's where private equity at a different scale of a different kind will always be the right solution. So the answer, of course, is, as always, not singular.
I have a friend who recently went into a large tech investing company, And I gave him a call and I was asking him about tech. How do we get involved in tech? There seems to be a lot of money that you can make in tech. Everybody's investing and making these enormous returns. And he said to me, Roland, you dinosaur, everything nowadays is tech. Having a tech fund is almost becoming irrelevant. Every industry that you go into, in some way or another, is connected to technology. If you invest into retail, you're investing in some way in technology, finance, logistics. And I think in Kazakhstan in particular, the scope for change in all industries is still large. You don't actually have to be investing into a specifically tech company. You can be bringing new ways of doing business and new ideas about how to do business in almost any area. And it's those efficiency gains that will really drive value and change.
Fantastic. Let me move the conversation to partnerships and the role of the government. We heard, I think, from all of you, the importance in some regard of how government can help facilitate investment, they can mitigate certain risks, and so on. What would be one or two very clear areas that you all think the government of Kazakhstan can support and help drive the private equity industry? Very specific, based on your experiences within the country and also externally. Yeah, please.
By the way, I will speak later in defense of the shopping malls.
As long as you innovate them, I'm fine.
Look, it's okay. I'll
We
talk
can
about
talk about shopping
right?
malls too, if you want to.
Look, I think that full disclosure, we invest into a chain of cinemas. You create a chain of cinemas. Okay, people come and watch the cinemas. The old model where you have a standalone theater doesn't work. Okay, we don't have the population density that would allow a lot of street retail. People go to the mall and there is a multiplicative effect. Besides, there is technology, as you said, Roland, right? And then the malls start buying, and for instance, the local grocery stores start buying in mass, in bulk, which actually stimulates production in bulk, stimulates industrial standards, etc. As for the technology investment role, I think, the guys who do tech in Kazakhstan, and I know some of them, they're not competing for the Kazakh money or private equity money locally. They go to Silicon Valley. It's fairly obvious. So if we talk about that, then we have to say it's the money that comes into the economy, stays in the economy, multiplies in the economy, rather than elsewhere. I mean, tech is fantastic if you have a gaming company, et cetera, but they're on a completely different level. The difficulties, as you mentioned, they're numerous. I guess sometimes it's actually useful to know Akim of Taraz as well, but they shouldn't be construed as an again, I think this overarching theme here is an obstacle, but it's a challenge and an opportunity. So going ahead with that, like with open eyes, with full knowledge that you can do that, really helps you. We are doing deals that are between $5 and $10 million. Transaction costs alone, they constitute a huge amount compared to the big deals. And the fact is that if you do due diligence for a $100 million deal, it still costs you the same as for a $5 million deal. So there are a lot of tiny, teensy little details and aspects, but if you're committed to doing it, looking at the local ops, then you have to very clearly and openly acknowledge that you're willing to be in this market. Of course, there's 160 countries around the world, but for whatever reason, you have to. And the government, the way it helps and the way they could help us, it's legislation. Of course, it's not a secret. A lot of people are trying to create either taking the investment vehicles offshore altogether and creating them under the English law. Or they're trying to construe this, shareholders' agreements, etc., within the limits of Kazakh law, but obviously knowing that there are gaping holes in that. Minority protection is a big thing. How do you make sure that your rights as a minority shareholder of, say, 25, 30% are as good as 50? Those things. And Astana International Financial Center, you can be very cynical about it and say it's going to be a flop or whatever. But I think unless you try it, it's like one flew over the cuckoo's nest, unless you try, you never know what's going to come out of this. Marcia, I think you have a...
Just,
comment there.
I think that you see the government actually moving towards addressing some of the issues. Even if we talk about this Pakistan International Financial Center, the mere fact that they now will be under English law is a huge step forward in terms of the government support. I mean, one of the things we can't make believe that it's not important. It is a game shift for investors. I routinely talk to investors in New York and around the world who say, okay, well, give me more about the AIFC. How can I actually have that English law protection? What exactly are the qualifications to come? They're paying attention and they're sitting up because they want not only the incentives, but they also want the protection. So I think that Kazakhstan is making some inroads. And as far as I remember, in terms of minority rights, Kazakhstan actually increased in the world ranking. Okay, so there's another thing. Let's not get beholden to passé knowledge. You need to innovate your knowledge as well. You need to be up to date on what's happening. Kazakhstan has improved its minority ranking in terms of shareholder protection. Kazakhstan is coming in and saying, for certain sectors within the Astana International Financial Center, we're going to have English law. We're going to give incentives. We're making worker passes to come in a lot easier. You know, there's a lot of very positive moves forward. And, you know, it's very good for the country to actually embrace them because they will provide extra channels of investment into the country. Just think about this. If the AIFC, which I hope is successful, you're going to have more international investors coming in, bringing more knowledge, being part of the policy narrative that you want, looking for auxiliary services, transferring knowledge, and everything we discussed here, from the way you put your shopping malls to technology, is all innovation. It's all innovation. That's why I keep saying not technology, I say innovation. So I think that these type of moves have to be ushered and supported and nurtured. And again, what Blackstone, that I know very well, does and looks for is different than what Ambassador looks for or what Aidan looks for. So let's stop only dictating what external investors want. We need to start creating an environment where internal investors from all levels of private equity investment are nurtured to create an environment of culture. And so that's what I think is important. Having that tension is very important. Having that development is very important.
If I may come back to your original question, I think there's a general framework for thinking where the government can step in, and it's actually not that different from a framework one would apply when thinking about securitization in a private market. Securitization is basically a process by which risk and return is matched to the right investor. So an investor that does more diligence, has more control, tends to take more risk and earn a higher return for doing that extra work. A part of that is some investors can bear certain risk, and other investors can bear certain other kind of risk. So, and that usually is dictated by who has best way to diligence that risk, to understand it, has the most information about it. So with that framework in mind, what are the areas where government fundamentally has more information and can quantify and diligence the risk more than the private investor? Those areas are the direction of regulatory change and things like currency. So those probably are the two risks that are very difficult for private sector to bear. So anything that the government can do to insulate the investor from those risks will stimulate capital inflow, because all other risks related to whether the enterprise works out, cyclical economic risks, global commodity pricing, all of that is fair game for private sector to study and understand. But specific currency, specific regulatory environment,